financial issues, they can get very complicated, but few are as relentless as the cost of supporting a special needs child. And if you are feeling overwhelmed by this, financial consultant Michael Bonds can help. Michael, thank you so much.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so before we started the show, you were telling me a pretty startling statistic. The CDC says that 20% of adults in America live with a disability.
That is correct.
Wow.
And if anybody that has a special needs child especially, you understand the difficulties of the day-to-day processes of just caring for them. But when we start to throw finances into the mix and the future of finances, it can be very, very complicated. So I wanted to come on today to talk a little bit about that because if you don't prepare appropriately, you can find yourself in just a web of discouragement when it comes to try to apply for these government programs.
Well, so what are some of the challenges that face people that are raising a child with a disability?
Well, not knowing it really, because there are some things you need to do, and you need to do them quickly and in sequence. So, for instance, when your child turns 18, for instance, you need to make sure that you're on or you're coded as a guardian for the individual.
Okay.
Because at 18, they become independent adults, and you will be cut off from any medical access on their records and any making any medical decisions. So that's the very first thing you need to do once they turn 18. The second thing is to start to apply for the government programs, and to get the most out of these programs, you need to start right when they become adults or a legal age of 18. First is Medicaid. That's going to help them with most of their medical expenses. The other one is something called SSI, which is a supplemental security income.
Okay.
It's basically a stipend that they'll get to take care of their basic needs and essentials. But if you don't get started on these things right away and you don't put the right pieces in place, they can be very hard to deal with.
Right, right. Well, so how can our parents make sure that the child is cared for? And this is, I mean, tough stuff to talk about, but we need to. Something happens to them. How can they make sure that the kid is taken care of?
That's a great question to ask, because even though these government programs are as good as they are, you need to be very careful about how the money's spent and how it's acquired. So let me talk to you a little bit about that. These government programs, if most states, if a special needs individual has $2,000 of assets or more in their name, it could disqualify them for any of these types of benefits.
Just $2,000.
Just $2,000.
That's it. That's
right.
nothing.
That's nothing.
Wow.
So you have to be you have to understand that, okay? Otherwise, it's going to really catch you off guard, because in most cases, when you have these types of individuals in your life, a lot of people give them money or they open up bank accounts and those kinds of things. So you have to be very careful. There are ways around that. Fortunately, you can open up something called a special needs trust. The reason why you want to funnel all these assets into the trust is simply because the trust is the owner of the assets, not the individual.
Gotcha.
The other thing to remember about the government programs is, as you get those subsidies and you spend that money for the needs of the individual, such as food and housing, you can't duplicate that with the money from the trust, or you'll disqualify them in that regard. So you have to be very cognizant of that. So you may use the trust money for food, or you may use it for travel, or even for vocational training, but you have to be very careful on that in that respect. A couple other things, I know my time's drawing sharp. There's a lot of intricacies to all this. You just need to be very careful with this. You want to make sure that your will's updated so that the information that's in there, all of the inheritance is going into the trust, not to the individual. You want to make sure you have successor trustees in place. It's very important so that they are qualified and they understand the needs of the individual. You want to make sure guardians are there in case something happens to you that can care for them on a daily basis. And you want to loop your family into all of this, because they need to understand what your desires are, even if you have to draw up a letter of intent. That's basically a guideline for the guardian to care for those people the way you want them cared for. These are all things you need to think about. I know it's not to the forefront, but you have to take care of these things in sequence to make sure you don't disqualify yourself.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, there's a lot here, a lot to talk about, so I'm sure folks out there, they have questions. How can they get in touch with you?
Just give us a call, 505-878-1328. That's my direct line, and the reason why I give that out is my first daughter was born with Down syndrome, so I clearly understand the intricacies of all this stuff. If you want to sit down and visit with me, that's great, but I've always been under the impression that these types of individuals are given to us as blessings, not as detriments. And they're given to us because we have the capabilities to be able to care for them, because they can't do it for themselves.
So, Mike, thank you so much. Really appreciate this discussion.